Well, thanks for coming to the pod.
Yeah.
This is only our third one, so we're still working out some of the kinks. But yeah, happy to have you on. And we kind of just start by having the guests kind of introduce themselves and kind of go from beginning to where you're at now. As we looked at your LinkedIn, we stalked you a little bit. Sure. And so we kind of know a little bit about your background and where you came from and all that. But I mean, I'm sure you have some little nuggets of wisdom to bestow and all that. So I'll just kind of let you brief overview. Would be fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I love what you guys are doing at Coles Ventures, and especially with Fuel, co-working, and a lot of those things. I'm really excited about how you're continuing to contribute to the Spokane ecosystem and those
Trying
things.
at least.
Yeah. So super excited to be here and obviously add value to that community and here however I possibly can. So.
For sure.
I guess in that vein, maybe I'll share a little bit of background. You had kind of asked a little bit in advance some history, and you even asked back to college, which was an interesting thought process for me, because I haven't thought about college in a long time, right?
Yeah.
Why did you make the decision? How did you go there? All of that. And so I started out at Washington State, got an MIS degree. Yeah, go Cougs. and got an MIS degree, and I graduated in 2001. So if you don't know the history of that, unfortunately you were probably barely born at that point, but we'll leave that for a different topic. But at that time, there was a dot-com bust. So I came out of school with what was supposed to be just awesome technology degree, and super excited to dig in. And MIS, for those that don't know, is typically that balance of leadership, so business leadership plus some information systems. So a lot of folks look into databases, or you could roll up to like a CTO style role if you're kind of going through that. And so really didn't know what I was going to do with that, except for that I knew, tech is up and coming.
Yeah.
I don't want to be an engineer,
right?
Because I don't quite have the facilities to be effective at that. But I also didn't want to just go in with general business, and so kind of had that combination. And so what that meant coming out of school was there were no jobs. Yeah. All of a sudden, all the big jobs at the Accentures and the Deloittes and all those dried up. And so at that point, it was kind of dialing for dollars. How do you actually go out there? And so I had built enough connections, and for students that are out there, I have children that are just getting to that level of going into college, and so there's way more advice than they would like in this process, where I'm actually, always telling them, hey, you should really do this, and you can't just, get good grades. You can't just focus on the SATs. You have to do the extras.
Yeah. But it's so hard, for kids, because, I was the same way. When I was in high school, I was like, people would tell me, do this. And I was like, yeah. But then, until you're there, it's hard to really grasp, I should have done, started volunteering earlier. And it's crazy, you think, okay, I'm studying hard, I'm getting good grades in high school, and then sometimes that's just that's not enough, because you have the person sitting next to you that did the exact same thing, but then they did this, or they were doing this on the side or whatever, and it's almost getting to where it's you have to be top of your class, and you have to have all these insane volunteer hours, and then maybe that's not enough, and you need to captain of the varsity, whatever, and then that's not enough. And it's just it's insane. So
yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because I think that's the dynamic that we're starting to see a lot more. And so in my mind, and this is definitely indicative of kind of my career and how I've gotten where I got, is I kind of did the opposite of what was the normal path, right? So throughout, so for example, I went dialing for dollars and looked for a startup, right? And I happened to have great experience because of the MIS club that I was part of, and was one of the officers there. And so I had some really great tours that we had set up with cool organizations, and one of them was a little startup. Yeah. And so I was able to start. I was officially person number 3 full time, and didn't realize till about 6 months later what we were doing, and we were building all the databases for Microsoft's class action litigation. Oh, okay. So really enormous, crazy stuff.
Oh my gosh.
And it took me a while to realize, well, what does that mean? What are we actually doing? How are we actually navigating through the process? So, so in that, as I kind of learned more about what we were doing and figured out where my unique talents lied, it was definitely not in all the lines of SQL code I had been writing. It was much more on the customer-facing side. Okay. So how do I go and be a problem solver and kind of focus on that? And I share that right now because I think, going back to what you were describing of really know yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So how are you going to, what's that unique kind of spark or benefit or value that you bring into the world that other people don't? And I know for kids, it's really hard for them to navigate through that journey.
It's tough. I think, especially going through school, they tell you so much of what you should be and what you should be learning and what you should want, that they forget that it's to ask the students, well, what do you enjoy? Or what, because, you know, I think what you're seeing a lot of now is either people are, you know, they're shooting for the top schools, they're still going to universities, but there's almost this kind of shifting back towards almost the trades. And there's a lot more people just going straight into that because I think people are seeing, oh, there's going to be a, you know, deficit in that. They can make good money just like year one. You know, a lot of them, you don't even have to go to school. It's like a, you know, 6 month or a year, you know, maybe 2 years if you go into something super specialized. But a lot of the time it's like, you know, from the first week you're shadowing somebody, you know, you're already doing the job. So I mean,
we're even seeing that with engineering, right? Obviously,
exactly.
with code schools and
they're
a lot
vibe
of
coding, or
things,
they're going to boot camps instead of getting a 4-year degree. And I mean, a lot of the big tech firms don't necessarily even care anymore about your 4-year degree. They just like, here, can you do, you know, this, you know, exercise or whatever. Which was crazy because like I had roommates in college that were software engineers or they were CS majors, and their process to get jobs versus my process to get a job was like completely different. They were, well, I was like, you know, reaching out to people, trying to organize coffee chats and lunches and all that. They were studying for their tests that they were gonna have to take. And they're just like, there's no tests on the business side. It's all just relationships and it's all just who you know. And so it's just, it's such a crazy different dynamic. But
I think it's really exciting actually for the kids nowadays, especially, you know, again, you know, my bent because of my kids and the age they are in high school, you know, looking at really how do they self-identify for that, right? How do they actually go through that process? One of my buddies, Tyler Lafferty, here locally, he has done.
We'll get him on the pod.
Awesome,
Eventually.
I love it. I love it. Happy to twist his arm if you need. But he has done some incredible work on really helping kids to know themselves, right, and kind of go through that process and dig into what actually inspires them. And some of it is as easy as, have you job shadowed somebody in that area, right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about, you know, what does a job shadow look like, you really just, you know, dial for people that you know. It's friends of friends, it's parents' friends, it's whatever. Can I come shadow you for a day? You have to really understand truly, what does this actual job look like? You know, how do we get there? Am I going to enjoy this once I do that 4 or 5 years?
Exactly.
6 years, 8 years, 10 years of studying to go in that process, right? Is that actually the direction I want to go? So there's just so much power in that and directionally, especially then with navigating the trades, right? What is actually a trade versus what is you know, something that you need to go and get a 4-year degree for, or you have a higher level of study. Where does it actually matter that you go to an Ivy League school or other places like that, like big law and some other things like that? It matters. But a lot of other areas it doesn't, right? Investment banking, it can, but sometimes it doesn't, depending on your path and where we're going.
It just depends. So. Yeah, I was reading an article a while ago about this one college. I wish I could remember the name of it, but they had a program where you would go, and I think your freshman and sophomore year, they made you take just like a plethora of just different classes to see what you were gonna like. And then after that, your junior year was half of it was school, and then the other half, they would pair you with a specific business that they had a partnership with through the university. So you were guaranteed like some experience through that. And then that kind of became, you know, word got out about that, and it was like, okay, that's actually more useful than, you know, some of the top universities. Like, you know, coming out of it, you know, you interned at whatever company. It's like, oh, this person has actual experience. Like, that's, you know, we're not seeing that from most people. It's just, it's crazy how it's kind of evolving.
And I love that. And, you know, I think everybody has recognized for a while that there's some pretty big challenges with the educational system.
Huge,
from top to bottom, right? Whether you're talking about higher ed, whether you're talking about, you know, the way that we're preparing kids for life. I think with that said, you know, there's just a lot of those cool opportunities, and a lot of ways to do that on your own and not just walk in and say, oh, where's the easy button, right? How do I get there? And I think that's probably the biggest challenge right now that I continue to see is, man, there's some inspired and incredibly talented and creative youth. And they're really good at finding the easy button. So as they go through, they're like, okay, where's the easy button? Oh, that's the path? Okay, I'll go down the path instead of having to you know, really struggle to kind of go through their own.
Yeah, no kidding. But anyway, I kind of cut you off. I'm going to rabbit hole. But
I love it.
Out of college, working for a startup. Do you remember what was the name of the startup, if you don't mind?
Yeah, Chameleon Data. Chameleon Data Corporation. One of my buddies was actually a software engineer. They're not anymore, but it was a great business for a while. And so wonderful experience starting out, and I learned so much about leadership, and I learned so much about you know, how you can be a phenomenal leader and how you cannot. And so really at that point, I got the opportunity to cut my teeth very early into leadership. And so probably was given more responsibility than would be, naturally advised.
Yeah, I mean, it's
in
kind of
those
one of the
scenarios.
benefits of going and working for the smaller team, especially for a startup. Is like, everyone, and that's so funny. You said I wasn't even sure what they did until 6 months in. 'Cause that's like, I mean, the majority of jobs, like you're not really sure what you're signing up for until like 6 months or a year and a half. But you said hire number 3, 4?
Hire number 3.
Number 3. Yeah. So
First college graduate.
That JD was like 6 pages long.
Totally.
You're gonna be doing a
Totally.
little this, little that. But
yeah.
I mean, that's fantastic experience.
And it's cute that you say it was defined because it was not.
Yeah,
Either, right?
It was like, it's kind of what we're thinking.
Exactly, yeah. But great experience. So did that, and then that happened to be in legal technology, as I mentioned.
Okay.
And so ended up staying in legal technology for about 15 years.
Wow.
Somebody had asked me I think it was you actually, asked me the definition of a startup, or what got you into startups. And I think as I looked at startups overall, it's always been a different dynamic. It's not true, venture backed. You have an idea, you go through this really natural, clean process of its, triple, double, right?
Yeah.
It's much more of, a lot of these were existing services businesses, and so we took them and converted them to tech-enabled businesses, or we took them all the way to SaaS businesses and kind of went through that whole space. And I think the unique thing that made them always feel like startups was we were always in growth mode. We were always figuring out, how do we dig in? How do we, create opportunities to grow? How do we identify where there's opportunities in the market and chase after those? So they're just really, really aggressive from a growth perspective. So even if they didn't fit the other criteria of startups, they were absolutely startups. Some were venture-backed, some were PE-backed. A lot of them were pretty closely privately held. And those can look very similar. People say lifestyle business. Well, I think that's a very, sometimes that's a misnomer, right? Because a lifestyle business can also be a high-growth, thriving, awesome organization. So.
I know. We almost need like a different label for that, because people hear lifestyle businesses, and in my head at least, I think, oh, like mom and pop, like pottery store, like they sell like knickknacks, or they're doing, but no, it can be like a legit, millions of dollars in revenue per year, like family owned even. I mean, you can kind of go however you want. So like lifestyle business, people I think has a bad connotation, especially in like the VC world when you're looking at I want it to be AI or SaaS or whatever. It's like, I don't want lifestyle business. It's like, well, maybe not for VC specifically, but I mean, for people that want to start their own companies, like that's not a bad way to go. Like in some cases, it can be better for you than the alternative. But
I'd love to kind of share a little bit about that, because it takes you into my experience. So a couple of years ago, I came out of an exit, a venture-backed turnaround. So definitely one of those scenarios where you lose a couple of years of your life, but gain so much experience. You feel like it was 2.5, 3 years, and I felt like I had 10 years of education in that process, right? So many things that I did wrong, so many things that were successes. Had the opportunity to work with some phenomenal individuals that really created a great experience. And in that, I said, man, I think I need to rest and recover a little bit. But then one of the investors came to me and said, hey, have you ever considered a search fund? And I said, gosh, what is a search fund? I don't know what that is. So they introduced me to the model and kind of took me through it. And a couple things that really stood out to me that were fascinating is I didn't have perspective on, I knew venture, because that's what, companies that I'd been part of. I knew a little bit of private equity, but I didn't really know, how their investment criteria was different, how their thesis was different. It all kind of looked a little bit the same. They put in money and they expect an outcome at some point, right? But very different thesis. And then, what I call in the middle of that is search funds, right? And so, just in case some listeners are not familiar, they'll Google it and they'll get lots of information quickly. What you find is, from an IRR perspective, the returns in search funds are actually higher than both PE and VC in the last couple of years, with a wildly different model. They're buying boring businesses, in existing industries. If it's in the newspaper or, it's AI or et cetera, it's probably not getting touched by search unless it was, that mom and pop idea. Somebody built some cool software in the back end, and now all of a sudden it serves a whole market where they just built it to make their lives easier, right? But it's businesses like that, right? Where we kind of go in and you say, okay, this is more of a trade, or a lot of times search funds have been HVAC companies, and whether it's tree or other things like that. And so with the search fund, it's fascinating because it kind of combines all of those worlds. Everything that we say, okay, we wish venture could do this, or we wish PE could do this, and they really don't fit those criteria. Search funds is in the middle. And so I share that just because it really kind of aligned the entire ecosystem for me, and really put me in the perspective of, okay, what are we doing, right? How do we create the right environment to create growth, to create opportunity, to create startups, right? And go through that process. And there's a really important place for venture capital, really important place for private equity.
Yeah.
And this kind of search fund in the middle idea, which can be everybody from they go out and buy a business that's doing $1 million of revenue, and maybe they're making 150K. Well, somebody buying that business, that can be a startup and be phenomenal opportunity, right? And oftentimes kick off way more cash. So this idea of I was like VC or bust, right? Okay, I need to be in one of these high growth and organizations that are just.
Well, it was a lot flashier.
Yeah,
right?
it's flashier.
I mean, you're looking at your three
sexy
options, and you got one that's like, PE's got just leaves a bad taste in your mouth for most people because it's like just the kind of clouds over PE, but like there's some good things about it.
Yeah.
And you got the VC that's like, flash and the glamour, and you think like Silicon Valley, and you've seen Facebook and Uber and all this stuff, and people think of that, and they're just like, oh my god, and then search funds, which I feel like lately has become more of a popular kind of subject that's come up, but a little bit lesser known.
Yeah,
for sure.
Totally lesser known. And to your point, I think all of them have, you don't realize what you're in it for, right? Especially with VC, understanding the criteria of, 9 out of 10 are losers in that process. And I don't mean losers from like people, but it's a bet that is losing, right?
Yeah.
It is a bet that is losing, and people put their blood, sweat, and tears into that, et cetera. All because they're looking at this and saying, oh, well, the outcome I really want is, a $5 million outcome, or to impact this many people, especially there's a lot of missionally based ones that are just incredible. They really want to have that impact, and they want to have the financial outcomes. Yeah. But they have to realize, in this ecosystem, that's what it means. You're either going to, burn fast and go, or it's going to die, right? Yeah. And naturally going to die because it didn't fit the need. Yeah. The go-to-market strategy was not aligned, all those things. And so I think, interestingly, the search fund fits in this weird little middle ground. Yeah. So that's what was attractive to me, and so that's what I was doing for the last couple of years, is searching for companies that are a little bit more of those, like I actually might be going out and cleaning porta potties because it's a porta potty business, and it's wildly successful. And what we never realize is there's a ton of opportunity, ton of money, ton of impact that you can have in those processes. So.
Yeah, I feel, at least for me, I feel like, because I did a lot of research on search funds like a couple months ago, and got really into it and started seeing all this press and all this, you see all the Instagram influencers that are like pitching this as like the next greatest, like the silver wave or silver tsunami or whatever. It's all these, boomers that are going to retire. They have all these really successful, profitable, stable businesses, no real succession plan. How do you feel that it's kind of coming into the forefront a little bit more, and maybe people are getting, I guess they could get like the wrong idea that it's going to be easy, that it's going to be like, oh, like, this person's been operating this car wash for the last 10 years. It prints, $500K of EBITDA. Like day one, I'm going to just hire somebody else, manage it, and I'm just going to like passively, get the rest. And that's how I'm going to do it. How do you feel about that? Because I feel like that's out there.
Yeah, it's totally out there. I think there are actually those opportunities where you can find, passive investments or inactive founders that say, I'm spending 10 hours a week on this business, just want to sell it, want to get out, et cetera. And it's never as advertised. And I'm not actually targeting the founders or the owners, the original owners in that process. I'm actually suggesting that, why do you have the experience that you think that, somebody who ran this for the last 30 years, you can just go in and replicate that model immediately with the same pattern recognition, the same decision making, the ways that they actually made it successful, right? The scars that they earned in that process. Same thing going back to the kids again. How often that, they see somebody and I'm like, hey, what did you learn from that person? What do you mean what I learned? They were a little bit older, they had some experience. I said, did you see all their scars? Every one of those scars has its story, right? Every one of those has an opportunity to learn. They went up against a brick wall and they came out, the other side, either through the brick wall, bounced off, whatever it was, right? And so I think we all can align with that, especially when we're thinking about those businesses that are existing, is, man, it's so much harder than you think. And I also always go back to people are the actual driver of that process. So, are those people there because of that original owner and founder, right? Is there something special that were they treated in a certain way that made them want to stay there? Well, then if you talk about, you bought this awesome business and all of a sudden your employees leave, what do you have, right? Yeah. How do you actually, even if it's a great car wash, you then have to, rebuild all the employees, go through the whole process.
Whole infrastructure.
Yeah, there's a whole thing. So it's phenomenal, but it takes work. And, it's never as easy as it sounds, I think, to your point.
Oh, yeah. I think, I mean, especially with social media being such a big thing in today's world, you see a lot of it where it's just like, oh, it's just like, it's easy. You just do this, and it's like, it's never as easy as advertised, like you said. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's a big thing. But
Yeah.
I want to talk about TheraSpark. What was that about?
Yeah, awesome. Opportunity here locally, phenomenal.
And they're still
company.
operating?
They are still
Okay.
operating. Yeah, it's a company actually called Winston Center. So
Okay.
they focus on ADHD and dyslexia
Yeah.
overall. They are really like the experts in ADHD
Yeah.
care for folks that are struggling with that. And
Yeah.
for me personally, it was just such a wonderful opportunity. It was an opportunity to help an organization that was already wanting to grow, kind of go to the next level, figure out how they can optimize some things within their organization, while they actually were building a really cool app to help to measure and benefit from a lifestyle standpoint some of these folks with ADHD specifically.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people don't realize is, and why I'm so passionate about it is ADHD. A lot of folks that we know that are successful, especially in the startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
Some of the most successful CEOs and founders absolutely have major symptoms of and/or
For sure.
diagnosed with ADHD, right?
Yeah.
And so you look at that and you can't help but say, okay, is this a superpower?
Yeah.
And of course, I always argue that, right? I'm a bright side, glass is like 9/10 full,
Right.
if it's only sitting there half full. So recognizing that in myself, I look at that and I say, well, clearly I'm walking in like, this is superpower. These people, just tell them that this is a superpower. Reset the world in their own perspectives of this. And that's just really not the case, right? There are challenges that it creates from a relationship standpoint, from navigating through, learning, from growing, from job opportunities, things like that are very real. And even, kind of self-regulation in that process. And so got to dig in, help them with some of their growth strategies, help them to build an app that was really impactful and they're still using, and
That's awesome.
and kind of navigate through that process. But really passionate because there's that fine balance of, I think that's really indicative of startups overall, right? You have these things that are holding the startup back from succeeding, and you have these incredible ideas or opportunities to really missionally impact the world, and they're really at kind of tension with each other at all times. So how do you minimize these while really maximizing those benefits?
Yeah, that's awesome. I saw that on your profile, and I want to talk about that because I feel like, same thing. In the last couple of years, it's kind of come up as a larger topic of conversation of, I don't know what they call it, like adult ADHD, like, undiagnosed, or people that are, you just might, what your, symptoms are, but you don't really know what it is until you go talk to somebody, and kind of the different avenues of that. And I think I'm a big proponent of like, a lot of people would say, oh, you have ADHD, like you have trouble focusing, whatever, and just like, here's a pill, and like figure it out. There's like so many things that you can do, like exercise or, diet or whatever. So it's like anything that kind of looking at it holistically versus just like, oh, here's this, like take this, that'll make you feel better or whatever.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's specifically what Winston Center and TheraSpark was doing, is actually focusing on those lifestyle components. So the sleep, the meditation, the nutrition, the hydration, all of those things, and how those actually impact the symptoms that folks are having with ADHD if they simply just address and focus on those core components. So phenomenal to see actually that impact carry over. And that's very true for all of us. I'm an absolute nerd on biohacking, health and wellness, all of that sort of those things. And I've seen a lot of those impacts, right? The times when I would have tipped over, Chargeback, the startup, right? When I was trying to work through that turnaround, there were a lot of scenarios where I should have, pulled the ripcord, could have pulled the ripcord, gone in that process, and I didn't. And much of it was based on, that I had created such good habits from that standpoint that I was able to be resilient through these scenarios where, man, I look back and even said, well, should you have walked out the door? Yeah, you should have. It was great. It was wonderful for so many people and what we were trying to accomplish. And, but a lot of reflection there for sure in that process. Definitely. And I think that's very similar with, folks who are struggling with ADHD.
Yeah, that's awesome. You kind of see a pattern, right, of, like you said, a lot of startup founders, they kind of have to be of like, what's over here and then what's over here, and because they're dealing with, oftentimes, one solo founders especially, or if you have a, 2-person partnership or 3-person, it doesn't really matter if you're, if you're the CEO, you're running the whole ship, you have so many things that are grabbing your attention at all times. Like, how do I, focus on, one thing at a time and whatever. And it's, I think also you see a lot of people with pattern as well of like, getting up early, like exercising before work, like just setting yourself up so that when you finally sit down and you're like, all right, now I'll let the chaos begin.
Yeah.
You've kind of set yourself up well so that you can handle all that. And
set your boundaries, set the guidelines,
exactly.
set the goalposts. You understand what the field looks like, where you're not going to step outside of bounds and where you are. All of it to get you centered. Love that.
That's awesome. Let's talk about your current / maybe not current role.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Let me talk a little bit about what I'm doing now. So I had an opportunity the last really 6-9 months to work with a great organization called Vimocity. They were doing workforce readiness, so injury prevention for line workers and folks in really high risk jobs, things that where you touch the wrong thing, you die. So very, very focused on safety and overall. And I've loved the industry for a long time. So I actually came across this opportunity through my search fund process. And, was seeing if there could be a way for me to actually put a deal together to acquire the organization. And unfortunately, that's not the case. But I had a wonderful opportunity to kind of work with them for a while and get more involved in that industry that means a lot to me. My grandfather was a lineman, so I got a pair of climbing hooks when I was very young. I think 8-9 years old, and
that's awesome.
And so it's always been part of my soul. And so to get to be involved in that was really really fun process.
That's cool.
And currently, I can't quite share yet, but I'm working on some cool opportunities that I'll be able to share here in the next week or so.
We'll have you back when you can chat about it. That'd be cool.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
For sure.
I mean, it kind of leads into one of the questions later, but it seems like kind of all the jobs you've had was either like maybe not right place at the right time, but like connecting with kind of setting yourself up. It wasn't just like cold emailing or cold applying on LinkedIn for sure. I guess like in today's day and age, what's your recommendation for people looking for jobs, trying to figure out the next thing when it's, maybe the hiring market's not awesome and you know what that's about. I don't know, I just feel like especially with LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever, they make it so easy to just, click a button, autofills all your stuff. But I mean, kind of in your experience, it's been about the personal connections versus just spray and pray.
Totally. So I want to clarify, one of the things that was interesting about college is I was not the straight A student, right? I actually got close to straight A's my last 2 years of college, but the first 2 years were definitely a different scenario than that. And so I came out actually not in that category with a lot of my friends. They had the straight A's, they had, wonderful test scores, they had, done all the right things. They were getting recruited by a lot of those big consulting firms, and I was kind of passed over like, okay, thanks for coming out, right? So out of necessity, I was required to do a different process than they were doing, right? So I think that was really the start of that process for me of recognizing that, in fact, at that point, I had the opportunity to hire a number of them to come work for me when their, awesome consulting jobs kind of fell apart right out of the gate. And they weren't hiring anymore because, again, the dot-com bust is a massive thing that a lot of people almost forget about at this point. But I think in that it really showed me that the process was going to have to be different. It was all going to be relational. It was all through that process. So I certainly, over the years, have applied for jobs, and I've updated my resume maybe 3 times out of the 10 or 11 roles I've had. But most of the time, they needed to understand, LinkedIn obviously has some of my history and some of those things. But they really were hiring me more for me. What do I uniquely bring? What do I contribute? Much less based on my resume. And that was, I think, similar for my first job as well, right? He was looking, I shared with him my transcripts. It's not like I was going through a transcript check, because with those large organizations, it's just almost impossible to recruit. How do you find those those kind of shining stars in that bucket of 300 resumes?
That's ridiculous. And I mean, for them, it's like, you're exactly 300 might be like
a
small
thousands.
amount.
They have thousands,
And especially now, if you post some, AI software engineer or whatever, you might get hundreds of thousands. I mean, I don't even know, but I mean, people complain a lot about the hiring process is broken, and like to an extent, I agree. But it's also okay. How do you make it easier for the people applying, but also for the firms, because they can't. I mean, it's not feasible to go through all of those applications. It's just not going to happen.
100%. So I think especially in those dynamics, I have found that the experience was always about relationships. So I think the question really is, how do you do things today that are going to impact you 5 or 10 years from now?
Right.
And what that looks like is, how are you building relationships, right? Outside of what will serve you today, what serves your organization, your key role. And that can be difficult because, especially when you're younger in your career, all your energy is going into, how do I ensure that I'm successful at this? How do I add more value to my organization? How do I think 3 steps ahead to figure out where I need to be so then I can continue to add value strategically and creatively. But you got to fit in that networking. You got to fit in, build relationships with everybody all the time. And it's not in a self-serving way. It's in a, you never know how they're going to be able to help you or how you're going to be able to help them, right? And especially when you get farther in your career, I think that's what you recognize, that it's an exchange of value, right? Yeah. Overall, are you the right fit to solve a need that you have? And I've had lots of scenarios where I was not the right fit, right? So I go in and you kind of look at this and say, oh, well, John obviously had a lot of great successes. I've had tons of failures, right? Yeah. And so in that process, just recognizing, what could I have done differently? Yeah. Did I need to do something differently? Or was I just not the right fit, right? And similarly, are these people not the right fit? And so I think as you're running organizations and leading folks, et cetera, I think that's one of the things that a lot of people struggle with is, oh, I feel so bad I have to fire somebody today. Yeah. Well, the first question is, do they know that they're, on the end of the rope, right? And sometimes it's just a financial thing and there's nothing you can do about it. It has nothing to do with their fit. It just happens to be, you can't pay them anymore, right? But oftentimes, most often, it's usually performance-based. Yeah. That they weren't aligned with what the organization needs. So how have you communicated that to him? How did you go through that process? How do you make sure that they're not just aware, but not going to be surprised by it, right? And then you come down to the last piece of that process, which is it's loving on that person to let them go, to release them into the next thing where they can actually, add value, right? It's best for them and the organization. So reframing the way that people think about fit in organizations, I think is really, really healthy. But it has to come from a, perspective of I love people, and I love, and as a result, as I think about the employees that, that are within my organizations or that I'm part of, there definitely is a dynamic there of how do you actually create that fit. And if it's not a right fit on either direction, let it loose, right?
Definitely, yeah. Have you ever had a situation where you've had an employee or somebody that reports to you and you see what they can be good at, but it's just not that role? Have you ever had that conversation of like, listen, I think you're great. This is not what's best for you. And it's not about, your performance or whatever, but like, God, you could be so great over here. Yeah. And it's just not about our relationship, but it's just, I'm trying to, push you. Have you ever had those?
Yeah, I've had a lot of those. Yeah. And I think what's unique about those is that even as you look at that, sometimes we have these, we're constantly getting signals from the world, right? Yeah. Oh, John, you're amazing at this. Oh, John, really, this is not your strength, right? And we have to decide what to do with those signals. So as those come in, those actually impact our core identity, right? And so as we take those signals and say, oh, everybody says I'm really great at connecting with people, really great at speaking in public, really great at whatever. Well, what do I do with that, right? Yeah. Does that mean that I need to go out and try to emulate Tony Robbins and be Tony Robbins? Does that mean that I should be customer service in an organization and just kind of go with that role? Like, what do I do with this? And so I think a lot of times people take those signals and they're trying to emulate somebody or something, but they haven't gone far enough in that self-evaluation or assessment process because they're new, they're early, they've had a couple of at-bats but not a ton, right? And I think even through the process, I'm 25 years into my career and I am still constantly iterating, oh John, you're actually, there's some kind of fine lines where here's a superpower of yours, you're not leaning enough into that, the world's not getting enough of that, whereas here's something that you're not particularly strong at. How do you actually minimize that and or make sure that doesn't get in the way of the other value that you can bring? So I think if you approach it from that perspective, I'm guiding them and saying, are you seeing this? Do you see this? Why are you passionate about this? Really those questions, right? Kind of going through that question asking process instead of you're not good at this, you need to be in a different role, passive aggressively doing it in that process. And that's why it's really hard with HR sometimes, especially in larger organizations, is they really control that process and say, you can say these 3 things in the termination process because they're so, understandably so, they're so fearful of litigation. That doesn't serve the person, doesn't serve the organization. It's just not good for the ecosystem at all. So the closer you can get to that, I think the better the entire outcome becomes. Because that person then gets visibility, they get clarity. You thrive in this, you don't thrive in this area. How do we actually put these things together?
Definitely. Yeah.
I hope that answered the question.
Definitely.
You were asking.
Definitely. Yeah, I think there's just so many times when people get into different roles just because somebody else tells them, oh, you'd be great at this, you should go do that, and there's like they don't maybe necessarily think like, oh, like would I even like? I mean, kind of what we talked about at the beginning of like have you shadowed them? Would you even really like doing that?
Or you just plain need a job. Like, let's be real, right? So often we take jobs because I need a job. Let's go, right? And so I think in that process, navigating through, was it the right job? Was it the wrong? And then you talk about leadership too, right?
Yeah.
Were you in the right job with the wrong leader, right? Or
Yeah.
the wrong part of the organization, or something else?
Yeah.
That's an additional factor that wasn't considered in that process.
Yeah,
So.
definitely. Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, I mean, okay, so all the jobs you've had, I mean, a wide array. We looked at your your LinkedIn. We were laughing this morning. We were looking at the LinkedIn, like the about section. It says like skills and specialties, and it's like, I mean, from around the world, you got a lot of different things you've done. What if you could name maybe like top 3? What would you say the 3 pillars of kind of what you've done, what you like to do, what you're really good at? If you're trying to go into an organization, you're like, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
What would that be?
Great question. I think the way that I would frame that is probably number 1. It goes back to my why. So I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek and his work, and just the clarity that it brought. There's so many different things that really feel like and are similar to that, but it helped me to really define my why. And my why is to empower others to do what inspires them.
Yeah.
And so really intentional about that. I think you, for example, you already have innate capabilities that are unique to you. Nobody else has those. You can be the best at X. I don't know what that is for you, right? And I'm not going to define that because I don't want to get into part of that creative process. I might give you a compliment, and you're going to take that and put that in your identity bucket and decide what that means, right? But I think in that process, basically, I want you to recognize that you can do far more than you thought was possible. Yeah. And in the angle of what inspires you, the things that get you up in the morning. So that a lot of the mission and vision work that people do in organizations, or especially core values work, is that, right? What does awesome look like in your organization? And don't just tell me, what does awesome look like? Who is that? What traits and talents are they displaying? Why is that important? Why is that impactful to the organization? As you do that process, you go through that. I love that work. Yeah. I love that. So I say that broadly, and like that's a key pillar for me, is figuring out how to get the right butts in the right seats and people excited and thriving and thrilled to be on that journey. Yeah. Because otherwise you don't get that. If you're inspired and you're empowered and you feel like, oh man, if I make a mistake, I'm not going to be tarnished or removed from the organization. I can be hyper creative because they're going to support that and they're going to tell me when my ideas stink and when they're amazing, right? Or when they're just not the right timing. Yeah. You can go through that process. If you're actually operating in that, you're going to be just incredibly more valuable to yourself, to the organization, value you can actually bring in all of that. I call it discretionary effort. There's a lot of argument, do we actually want to measure discretionary effort? Because that's that like last 20% of what you can deliver to folks. Yeah. That is magic. When you're actually operating in that, you are way more efficient, you're way more optimized, you're creating a lot more value. Just a lot of things that you're bringing to the world. Yeah. So helping people to get to that point. So that's probably item number 1. Okay. Is that kind of an answer to that question?
Definitely.
It's not a role, but it's a topic.
I have a sub-question off of that. Do you think most organizations define, here's what we do because this makes money. But do you think they define maybe organizationally or even positionally of why they're doing that?
I think most don't, which is Simon Sinek's why, right? Why he said, hey, you all got it wrong, right? Yeah. You're forgetting that whole baseline. But I think most organizations, they might be aware of that. The founders understand that. But it's almost like they're afraid to share that, right? They're almost like, well, somebody can't get behind that we want to help ADHD folks because I have ADHD and I want to help people like me, right? Yeah. Whatever that might be. But I think they're afraid of that. And so instead they create a mission that is not in alignment with that. And I think some organizations, Winston Center has done a phenomenal job at that process, of really that vision and values. But then how do you make sure that people that are coming into the organization are aligned with that? How do you make sure that they're actually part of that process? So I think there's a mixture of who's kind of missing that process.
It's great. Well, it's hard for businesses too, right? Because it's like when you want to break it down into, I need a sentence or two, like what is the mission? What are we doing? I mean, that's hard. Yeah. People think it's like, oh, well, you're doing this to help blank. And it's like a lot of the times it's not that, or what you think the mission is, isn't.
A lot of people focus on the what and how rather than the why.
Exactly.
Right? They forget that why part instead, and they're just doing the what and how.
Exactly.
What are we building and how we're building it? Yeah.
I agree.
Going back to your question about the maybe top 3 things, and then I would say I used to call it ability to run through walls, and I actually had an investor they wrote a book that was glass eaters, and they talked about what we're hiring is glass eaters. Those are the founders and the folks that we want to back are the glass eaters, right? So somebody who walks in and says, "There's a light bulb," and you're saying all I have to do is eat that, and then we're going to be able to move through that wall, But yeah, folks that are willing to run through walls. And one of my favorite books is Comfort Crisis. And it's by Michael Easter, and I really enjoy him as an author. And he really focuses on that scenario. What we talked about lifestyle with ADHD before, right? What are we actually doing to create those challenges in our daily life, right? How are we doing hard things every day? When you go into a workout, are you just showing up, or are you showing up in a way of like, okay, well, that says 10, I'm going to do 12 today. Can I do 12? And then you get down with 12 and you're like, oh, okay, I'm done. Or did you have 2 more left in you? And how do you actually create those kind of micro opportunities to challenge yourself and win? And I think that actually creates some of those dynamics for Best Venture and
definitely
kind of going through that.
Yeah, I mean that's I think what you said earlier about most people can give you the 80%, or sometimes even like 60% is like, we'll do the job and it's fine.
Show up, do the job, don't get fired.
Exactly, right? I mean, you have those people, and like that's fine. There was a tweet, or it was a quote, I can't remember, it was going around a while ago, but it was like, most people can do the 80%. The 20% that makes the whole, that's when you get kind of that overachieving. That's when you really get like the excellence that some, even the startup world, or you can kind of coordinate it with a lot of examples in the world, but that's kind of when you really hit the stride, and you see that difference between, you could have 2 firms, and one of them is just showing up every day, doing what's asked, nothing really more. The other one, they have the glass eaters, right? They have the people that really want to make it and grow it, and you see, over time, you might not notice it day to day, but over the course of 6 months, a year, 5 years, it's like night and day.
Yeah, and that's a challenge for you as venture investors, right? It's a real challenge to identify for each of those investments you make, what is it that makes them into glass eaters? What is it that, and there's different, sometimes there's pressures. A lot of times we have that stick and carrot kind of mentality of like, okay, this person needs more stick, this person needs more carrot. But oftentimes it's like, hey, all you need to do for that person is make sure that they understand you believe in them, right? Walk into the room and say, there's a lot of other things you could say in a board meeting, but sometimes it's just, I know you're stressed, I know you're freaked, we believe in you. We're here for this journey, we're here to support you. And we're gonna write a $50,000 check that shows you that, right? Whatever it is, or a couple hundred. But I think that oftentimes there's misalignment there, and so people are just operating in fear for a lot of their lives. And in fear, you can't be creative. You can't actually create the right environment to have the right successes. So you end up blocking what you're trying to create because of the wrong incentives in place.
I think that's kind of a great comment, and we get asked a lot of okay, what are you looking for in your companies? And I think people are expecting an answer of, oh, we're looking for 500,000 in ARR and like the right industry and all this. And it's like at the early stage that we're investing in, a lot of it is just what do we think about the founder? And it's hard to quantify and kind of put into words, but it's a lot of it of like, have you done this before? Like, do you really know what you're getting into? Because like we see it every day of people just like, one day you'll be super up and you've maybe you signed a crazy customer, and the next day maybe that deal falls through, or maybe it's like how many times can you fall flat on your face and still come back the next day and like keep going and keep going and keep going.
Recognizing if you were supposed to continue that same journey,
right?
Or if it's time for a pivot, right? And not just the journey in that startup, but how many we had Scott Weinert spoke at one of the local events just recently that Tom put together, and it was just so awesome to hear the number of pivots that they had in order to get to where they're now thriving, right? And that happens so often, and we just don't realize we're targeting the wrong things. And the challenge with ADHD founders, right, and many founders overall, is that they can't stick to things long enough to actually test them, right? They can't actually stick on the same course to say, have we fully vetted this and tested this? Is this a problem with the way we're delivering it, the way we're messaging it, how we're actually approaching the market? Or is it actually a product market fit issue that we need to go and we need to pivot, right? This is the wrong product for the wrong market, let's go. What have we learned from all the things that we have, and let's go forward. But it's really hard because oftentimes people have put 2, 5, 10 years in their thesis. They believe in their thesis, not necessarily what are we trying to create, a thriving business or not? Are we trying to add value or not? Right?
What would your recommendation be on that? Because it's kind of like catch-22 almost of, you want to do something and maybe you're just not doing it long enough. You might be like that. I don't know, there's this one photo of like the miners, and like one of them quits early and he's got a bunch of diamonds right here, and the other one like, keeps going and keeps going, and he like finds it all. And that's kind of, metaphor for a lot of things. But then on the other hand, it's like, okay, at what point have you been doing the same thing? You keep falling flat in your face. It's just not working. Yeah. How do you differentiate whether you need to pivot or you just like, maybe you just haven't been doing it long enough?
I think for me, one of the things that has made a difference goes back to, as you were asking about, like how you got your jobs.
Yeah.
Have lots of conversations, have lots of mentors, get lots and lots of input. A lot of times I think people find, and actually it was a struggle for me, I've found very few mentors that were like, here's my mentor, he is my sensei, she is my sensei, and I want to emulate everything they've created.
Yeah.
Because I find that oftentimes, especially in startups, the startup eats people alive.
Yeah.
That means it eats their family alive, their relationships, their spouses, their kids, all of that, right? And so I looked at that and said, okay, I really like what you're building here, but I want nothing to do with any of these other ways that there have been consequences of that.
Yeah.
So it's been really hard for me to find that person. I think that's actually a fault on myself. So rather than saying, okay, I'm going to have 12 mentors, and each of them are going to bring a little piece, and I'm going to combine it together and build my reality that I want to. I think sometimes I've just strayed away and I've said, okay, great, here's some contribution this person can add or something I can learn from, but not applying that quite strongly enough. But going back to answering your question, I think that's one of the ways that you do that process, right? People
mentors.
who have been through it, people who have not necessarily been through it, but just have, I think, a lot of subject matter expertise in those areas.
Yeah.
There are so many risk-averse folks with some of the best ideas ever, and have pattern recognition that can change the game for you overnight. But a lot of times they're just, well, you haven't done this, you haven't done startups, you're in a cushy job, comfortable. Well, doesn't mean they don't have the right ideas that are going to actually drive these things forward. So I think really being open to where you garner those inputs is really important.
Yeah. Where would you suggest people, looking for mentorship, looking for some guidance? Where do people go looking for that? Because I think there's a lot of people that agree with you.
Yeah.
They're like, yes, I would love that. But like,
Totally.
where do I go? Is it, looking at local events? Is it just Google searching? For people in the industry, I think, there's a lot of, the barrier to entry for that is like pretty low as far as like you can, look up anybody on LinkedIn or find out pretty much anything about anybody anymore. But, to get that kind of one-on-one mentorship, how do people go about that?
Yeah. I think the first thing is don't be afraid to ask. And what that ask looks like is something very light. Would you be willing to have a call with me next month, right? And then every time you have that call, you say, is there any chance you'd be interested in having a call with me again next month? Is there any way I can add value, right? So you have to figure out how you're going to have an exchange of value in that process, because people who are mentoring, oftentimes they're going to do it because they want to give back, they want to contribute to what got them to where they were. They had some phenomenal mentors that were willing, for some dumb reason, to spend time on them when they were young and just kind of coming through the process. So there's a lot more people that want to mentor folks than I think people realize. And if somebody comes up, if I receive a letter in the mail that says, hey, I'm Blake and I'm really excited to jump into investment banking, and here's what I'm hoping to learn. I recognize this in your career that just blew me away. Is there any chance I could buy you a virtual coffee? Can I whatever, right? Again, I'm just hoping for some guidance, some pattern recognition, a little bit of river guiding, right? Would you be willing to spend 20 minutes on a call with me, just kind of guiding me through? If that goes well for them and you, and they enjoy the interaction, awesome. And then, of course, you send the follow-up little gift. And maybe it's a $10, it's a candy bar, right? $5. It costs you $7 in order to do the process. You do that to 10 of the folks that are your dream folks for having as mentors. The likelihood is you're going to get a response from a couple others. Or they say, I really don't have time, Blake, but I'm going to put you in touch with this person.
Right, and that's the other thing I think people often forget is like they have this one person that's got their dream job, and they only want to talk to that person. It's like there's so many people around them, and I can't remember, there's some stat of like people, again, kind of going back to people getting jobs or applying, that it's like usually not your immediate circle, but it's like the second, the third connections. It's like, well, I don't have it, but talk to this guy, and this guy might have something, and it's like kind of through the outer circles that people can get that mentorship, get that referral or whatever.
Totally. And so just being open to the idea of like, I'm hungry, I'm trying to get information, how do I get there? I think that's what a lot of us there was this definition of shame that I've just really held on to. I think I heard it maybe 15 years ago now, and should have already mastered everything. And it's this idea of like, what is shame when we think about that we somehow, and it's just lunacy that we think this, but we somehow walk in feeling like, well, I should know that. I'm gonna look like an idiot if I ask them this question. Yeah. And oftentimes it's just you holding us back. The other person doesn't expect you, to know these things, doesn't expect you to already have mastered things. And so walking in that, even as a leader, right? Certainly as a CEO, I've had that a lot of times where I walk in and say, everybody expects me to know this, and it's not this process. So what happens if I walk in and I diffuse the situation and say, I don't know all the right answers here. Here's what I do know, and here's what I need input on. Who can help? How do we go through that process?
Well, it helps the entire organization, right? If you set the tone for this, you're going to get so many things that come out of that meeting or whatever. That's like you learn where your holes are in your standards and processes, and it's like, without that, it's kind of.
And so many leaders think that it's their job to know that or do that when they're not close enough to the end product to actually do that. You have to bring in those other people in the process in order to allow that to occur.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, okay, for the people that are thinking about starting their own business, or maybe they're already, kind of in the process, what's like maybe the most important thing that, maybe not advice, but the most important thing that you would want them to know? I mean, having worked in startups and kind of done the whole process from like beginning to end, if you're like, you're getting into it, you're thinking about it.
This is probably more self-assessive than it is advice. It doesn't have to be the most unique. It doesn't have to be something that somebody's never done before. Yeah. It doesn't have to be like such a unique angle that nobody else has touched to actually have it be successful. I would say a huge percentage of my success has been a result, and my organization's success, I should say, rather than mine personally, but it's probably mine personally, is I believed in creating a superior customer experience, right? So the like Four Seasons model of customer experience. Yeah, their hotels now are different because they've invested more money in those, right? Yeah. You get a bit of a different experience. But really it came from somebody saying, I am dedicated to giving the absolute maximum possible experience. They started with the same rooms, they started with the same offering. And when this group was providing wildly better experience than this group, they won. And they won in a way that allowed them to differentiate themselves. And again, winning is not always winning, right? Yeah. This might be highly profitable. This person retires 20 years earlier than this person because they're still chugging and grinding because it took them 30 years in order to realize the return on that investment. But I think just that process of recognizing you can do something just better than everybody else and have an outsized return or opportunity. So I think that can be enough. But again, I want to diffuse that with a very slippery slope. Like that's a super slippery slope to say there's 5 other people already doing exactly the same thing as I somehow I'm gonna IPO and get in this process. So from a venture standpoint, that can be a struggle. But from an overall value creation, organization creation, and creating something awesome and special and large and profitable and all of those things, I think that's a big thing that people get blocked on.
Yeah, I mean the first thing that comes to my mind is like Starbucks, right? It's like when they started, I mean, coffee places are like 1 in a million. There's just so many of them. Like what made Starbucks really, the greatest, now you see them on like every block. And I think it was because originally, they started off of like, with that experience. They're like, everyone can serve a cup of coffee, but like, what are people feeling when they're having that coffee? And it's funny because they've almost reverting back to that now, as they kind of strayed away from that and got into like all these crazy drinks and stuff. And it's like, they weren't really sure, and customers were no longer sure what they were really providing. So now they're almost kind of going back, and it's like, all right, we're gonna scrape it. We're going to go back to what experience are people providing. And I think you're seeing a lot more of that post-COVID of, everyone's kind of yearning for that in-person, social, community feel. I think there's a lot of that coming out post-COVID.
Yeah. And I think as startups, that's an important piece as well, right? When is it important to have as many of your co-founders or collaborators in the room as possible, right? How much more magic comes out of that? And then does it require, as you expand and need to be able to do, you need those 300 resumes to stack up because you don't have enough, right? Then you have to go remote or do some things like that. But I think there's a lot of pieces of that as well.
That's awesome. Okay, if you weren't doing startups, what do you think you'd be doing?
Oh man, I would be a school teacher. I would be a school teacher and a coach.
That's awesome.
I have always, in fact, my career almost exemplifies teaching. So if you think about what does a teacher do, most of my career has been educating people, helping them learn concepts and theories that'll make their lives easier, better, faster. Of course, not with a rubric and a structured process, but what do you walking into a room with whether it was big law at the beginning or through my process and saying, what's your challenge? How are you trying to solve it currently? How do you go through that? Same thing for teaching, right? How do you actually get people to expand their horizons and especially kids and understand that they're capable of far more than the world has told them. And most importantly, that they're telling themselves they're capable of. So
awesome.
I love sports for that. I love, being a teacher. So I think
that's awesome.
That's what it would be.
What would you coach? What would be your sport?
I would, I think the most impressive sport is football. I happen to love football, and it was always a love of mine, but because it's so hard to get 11 people doing exactly the right thing at the right time, all choreographed together, right? Basketball has some of that, but it's only 5. So you got 11. So I think it's a beautiful, they don't really want to consider themselves ballet dancers, but it's basically a ballet out there of like perfect synchronization to make everything happen at the right time. So I think it's incredible.
Cool. Anything else to add before we wrap this up and get you on here with your day?
Gosh, man. Just again, thanks for having me here.
Of course. We'll have to have you on again. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah. I would love to, especially with this this community, if there are organizations that need guidance, that I always try to make myself available for folks that are either just starting out or farther in their journey and running into those employee challenges and things. I love to help in any way I can.
Awesome.
So
and then where can people find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn.
Email?
So I think LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. Email that way, and then always happy to. I'm sure they know somebody that knows me, so if they can't find me, then they can always reach out.
Perfect.
Or send me that little letter that says I want you to be a mentor.
Yeah.
Or
physical letters.
Even better, if a mentor that needs a mentee, I'm all ready to go. So good for any of that.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
Great time.